So today we are reacting again to Many Prophets One Message, and I don't hope he gets me raging again, right? Um, but this time we are reacting to one of his videos, called "Were the Gospel Authors Divinely Inspired?" So let's have a look at it without much more speaking. It is a good intro, by the way.
Comes to the reliability of the Gospels, many Christians believe that their authors were writing under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, providing multiple independent, yet perfectly harmonious testimonies about the life and ministry of Jesus. In this video, we will put this belief to the test by comparing the Gospel accounts. There is in fact compelling evidence that the authors of Matthew and Mark were copying from one another. If we compare these two texts, we can see that they are both narrating the same speech of Jesus.
Okay, so Matthew 24, verses 15 to 16. So, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, parentheses, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Mark 13, verses 14. Or verse 14. But when you see the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not to be, parentheses, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Alright.
Notice the identical comment, let the readers understand, by both authors.
In parentheses.
This statement is obviously not something that Jesus himself said, but rather is the Gospel author's editorial comment directed to us, the readers. It is extremely unlikely that two writers would, by pure chance, insert into their accounts exactly the same editorial comment in exactly the same place. The simplest and obvious explanation is that one of the writers was using the material of the other as a source and copied not only the bulk of the speech of Jesus, but also the same editorial comment. This seriously cast doubt on the traditional understanding that Matthew and Mark were independent eyewitnesses to the life and ministry of Jesus, as it appears that one of...
Well, although Matthew, being a direct eyewitness, he was one of the 12, and Mark, he wasn't an eyewitness, but he was a student of Peter, according to tradition. It could be that Matthew, because actually, if you read the Gospel of Matthew in and of itself, Matthew is not there from the beginning. He's only picked up by Jesus later on. So there could be some things where Matthew, he didn't know. There are some things that Matthew, he didn't know, which Jesus did in his ministry. But there is something that Mark, he knew, which he had from Peter, which Matthew didn't have access to, because, for example, he came later on. So maybe Matthew could have copied some things from Mark, knowing that Mark was a student of Peter. So it's not a problem at all. It seriously casts doubt on the traditional understanding. It doesn't cast any doubt on the traditional understanding at all. It doesn't. Right? Although I be an eyewitness to whatever my mom do in her life, there are some things she does where I'm not present. So sometimes I also have to go to people who might not be direct eyewitnesses to what my mom did, but maybe they know somebody who knows my mom. For example, they are friends with her aunt, right? So I could go to that person who is a friend of my mom's aunt, who thus have had some knowledge of what my mom did through the eyewitness of my mom's aunt. So sometimes I could possibly go to that person because maybe he knows some things which I don't, right? So it's not a problem at all. And just wait. This guy will soon reveal what an idiot he is, actually. Just wait a minute.
Authors was plagiarizing the other. Now,
oh, so that is plagiarizing. Because Matthew copied the editorial comment of Mark, or the other way around. Okay, Okay, many prophets, one message. Then how do you explain that according to the Quran, Jesus he spoke Islamic theology from the cradle, which was actually a story, a legendary story in a Christian apocryphal work called the Arabic Infancy Gospel, where Jesus he preaches from the cradle. How do you defend that then? How do you defend that? So likewise, likewise, I can say this seriously casts doubt upon the traditional understanding of Muhammad being a prophet. I could say the same thing then. We just half and a minute into the video, and this guy's so fallacious. It's oh my eternal, right?
Christian apologists and missionaries may argue that this is not an issue, so long as the earlier source was inspired, and so long as the later authors were faithful in their copying process, then all the accounts will contain reliable information about Jesus. Let's now put this argument of theirs to the test by comparing the gospel accounts.
Okay. Let him do it. The woman in the crowd.
Gospel of Mark mentions the following incident about a woman in a crowd. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years.
It's that
When she
woman.
heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately her bleeding stopped. At once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" Here is Matthew's account of the same incident. Just then, a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, "If I only touch his cloak, I will be healed." Jesus turned and saw her. "Take heart, daughter. Your faith has healed you." We can see that the Gospels of Mark and Matthew both narrate a story about a woman who was miraculously healed by touching the cloak of Jesus.
Sure.
In Mark, Jesus is ignorant about who touched him. He had to consult the crowd in order to find out. Contrast this with Matthew, who changed the story so that Jesus immediately knew who touched him. The author of Matthew seems to have wanted to portray Jesus in a more powerful light.
No, maybe I find actually the Gospel of Matthew is actually quite abbreviative. It abbreviates much of the details of Jesus's life to very short because he wants to cut to the point. So it could be that Mark's account is true. Who touched my clothes? That was what Jesus he first asked. And then later on, he found out that it was this woman. And then he says in Matthew, "Your faith has healed you." However, Matthew has omitted that, abbreviated it, and has just cut to the point of saying, "Your faith has healed you." It could be that in Mark, Jesus, again, I just think it's Matthew abbreviating something here, omitting some details, because it just wants to get to the point. It isn't changing the narrative. Right. What I was trying to say is that, yeah, Mark has Jesus saying, "Who touched my clothes?" But Matthew probably also has Jesus, "Who touched my clothes?" But he has just omitted that and abbreviated it to "Your faith has healed you" to the woman. It could be such a case.
The Gospel of Mark mentions the following incident about the disciples. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion.
This is just talking about Jesus sleeping during a storm on the sea. I swear to God, it doesn't have any difference at all. Go look it up yourself, because I really can't see it. Oh, a question.
The Gospel of Mark mentions the following incident.
Mark 10:17-18.
About a man who questions Jesus. As Jesus started on his way, a man ran up to him and fell on his knees before him. "Good teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "Why do you call me good?" Jesus answered. "No one is good, except God alone." Here is Matthew's account of the same incident. Just then a man came up to Jesus and asked, "Teacher, what good thing must I do to get eternal life?" "Why do you ask me about what is good?" Jesus replied. "There is only one who is good." We can see that the Gospels of Mark and Matthew both mention an incident about a man who approached Jesus and questioned him about eternal life. In Mark, Jesus rejected the questioner's praise of him being good.
No, see, now he's distorting the Gospels, while he accuses Matthew of distorting what he said. In Mark, Jesus he doesn't reject anything. He just asks, "Why do you call me good?" He just asks the question, probably in order to say to the man, "Do you really know who I am?"
Saying that God alone is good. Matthew seems to have been troubled by this and therefore rephrased Jesus' answer very subtly from "Why do you call me good?" to "Why do you ask me about what is good?" so as to avoid the difficult implication that Jesus is...
Matthew didn't change anything. It's probably just different perceptions from different perspectives, right? Why do you call me? Why do you ask me about what is good? Why do you call me good? Why do you ask me about what is good? The latter is in Matthew. Why do you ask me about what is good? Why do you call me good? Why do you call me good? Why do you ask me about what is good? Yeah, again, I just think it's different perceptions from different perspectives, right? I mean, it's like saying, for example, it's like saying on this piece of paper, it reveals some information about a random person, and then another person who also saw that piece of paper, he says on the page, there was some information about an animal. So are they in contradiction? No, they perceive it from the different perspectives. It could be that the latter guy, the second guy, it could be that he saw something on the other side of that piece of paper on the other page. But the first guy, he only saw what was written on the first page. He didn't saw what was on the second page. The latter guy, the second guy, he saw what was on the second side of the piece of paper. So it's just different perceptions from different perspectives. There isn't any distortion here. It isn't that Matthew wanted to portray Jesus in a higher light and Mark had it in the original. No, it wasn't anything like that. The crucifixion.
The Gospel of Mark mentions the following incident about the crucifixion. "And at 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, 'My God, why have you forsaken me?' With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last." Here is Luke's account of the same incident.
Yeah.
Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." When he had said this, he breathed his last. We can see that the Gospels of Mark and Luke both record the dying words of Jesus.
Oh, okay, let me talk.
In Mark, Jesus is alleged to have cried out in blasphemous despair. Luke's account completely reversed this by placing in the mouth of Jesus the far more stoic and submissive statement, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit."
No, do you see how wicked and evil this guy is? He says the last words of Jesus were, "Why have you forsaken me?" In Luke, it's the infamous, "I commit my spirit to you, O Father." No, Jesus, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" while he was crucified, while he was on the cross. That wasn't Jesus' last words. Okay, so Jesus, he said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He says that while he's on the cross. A little more time goes, and then he eventually says, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit," and then he dies. Jesus doesn't die immediately after having said, my God. He says that after having said, "I commit my spirit to you, O Father."